The room Freezy's room was quiet when Sundar walked in. His steps echoed on the polished floor, and the walls seemed to close in around him. It was a sunny morning outside, but inside the tension was thick like a fog. He could feel all the eyes on him, waiting for him to speak. He put his hands on the table and looked at his team. They looked nervous. They should. He was nervous too, though he hid it better than most. Sundar Pichai, the man who climbed from a small home in India to one of the biggest offices in the world, now stood there, feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. He opened his mouth to speak, but stopped. He didn't know what to say. A few days before, an email had leaked. An ugly email. Someone on his team had written a cruel, racist comment about him, and another had replied to it with a laugh. It spread through the company like wildfire. Sundar had read it in silence, staring at the words as though they belonged to another world, but they didn't. They belonged to his world now. He took a breath. I don't know if I can keep doing this, he said. The room froze. No one moved. Not a single sound, not even the click of a pen. The words hung heavy in the air. Sundar felt them too, heavier than he expected. He wasn't just speaking to them, he was speaking to himself. A woman at the end of the table finally spoke. Sir, what do you mean? Her voice trembled. He looked at her, then at all of them. They all seemed so small, so young, so fragile in that moment. And yet, it was he who felt like breaking. Sundar said, I've spent my whole life believing in kindness, in respect, in treating people the right way. And yet, here we are. This company is my family. I thought we shared those values, but... He trailed off. The woman lowered her eyes. Another man shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Someone else coughed. Sundar stared out the window for a moment, remembering his childhood. He thought of his mother, of her soft hands, of the way she used to tell him, you don't fight hate with hate, son. You fight it by being better than it. He shook his head slowly. I don't know anymore, he whispered. There was another silence. Then a surprising sound, applause. Just a single clap from the back of the room. Sundar turned and saw Rayesh, a young engineer, standing with tears in his eyes. Sir, Rayesh said, don't let them take that away from you. You're the reason I believed I could be here. If you give up, what does that say about all of us? Sundar felt something shift inside him, but he couldn't find the words. He nodded, but his heart was still heavy. After the meeting, he walked down the long corridor alone. The walls seemed to whisper doubts at him. He reached the elevator and pressed the button. When the doors opened, there was someone inside. An older janitor, mopping the floor. She looked up and smiled at him warmly. Rough day? She asked. He nodded. You look like someone who carries too much, she said. Maybe, he said softly. Don't let bad hearts make yours heavy, she said. He almost laughed. Her words were so simple, but they cut right through him. He stepped inside the elevator, and she gave him another kind smile before she went back to mopping. When he reached his office, he found another email waiting for him. It was from an unknown address. He opened it slowly. It was just a single sentence. You don't belong here. Go back to where you came from. His hands trembled as he read it. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then, without thinking, he typed a reply. Thank you for reminding me why I need to keep fighting. He hit send. That night, he stayed late at his desk, staring out at the city lights. He thought about everything. The boy who had grown up with no running water. The young man who had left his country for a dream. The leader who now stood at the head of a company where some people still saw him as less. And he thought, maybe this is the fight. Maybe this is what resilience means. He stood up and walked to the window, feeling the cool glass against his forehead. He could hear his mother's voice again. Don't fight hate with hate. But how much could one heart take? Just then, his phone buzzed. A message. This one from his daughter. Good night, Daddy. I am proud of you. He closed his eyes, and for the first time that day, a tear slipped down his cheek. But outside his door, someone was listening. One of his senior executives had paused, hearing Sundar's soft words through the crack. And on her face was not sympathy, but a sly, dangerous smile. She walked away quietly, dialing a number on her phone. "Yes," she whispered. "He's breaking. He won't last much longer." And with that, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving Sundar alone at the window, unaware that the real battle had just begun. Asterisk the silent Anemeth next morning. Sundar woke before the sun. He sat at the edge of his bed for a long time, staring at the floor, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside his window. His wife was still asleep, her breathing calm, her hand resting gently on the pillow beside him. He didn't want to wake her. He felt a heaviness in his chest that no amount of sleep could take away, and it was growing heavier by the hour. When he finally stood, his knees felt weak. He went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face, staring at himself in the mirror. The man looking back at him seemed tired, older than the one from a year ago. The lines near his eyes were deeper, his shoulders slightly slumped, his gaze more uncertain than he wanted to admit. He whispered to himself, as if trying to convince the reflection, "You are stronger than this." But the reflection said nothing. Dressed quietly, choosing a plain gray suit, and left before the household stirred. The driver was already waiting outside. Sundar nodded at him, and they drove through the still dark streets in silence. As the car turned toward the office, he thought again of the email from the night before. Those cruel words still rang in. His head dot when he arrived at the office. The building stood tall and cold against the morning sky. He walked through the glass doors, feeling the chill of the air conditioning wrap around him like a shiver. The lobby was nearly empty at that hour, just a few security guards and a cleaning crew. He liked this hour. It was the only time the building felt quiet enough to hear his own thoughts dot as he reached his office. He noticed something strange. His door was slightly ajar. He was sure he had closed it the night before. He pushed it open slowly, his eyes scanning the room. Everything looked normal at first. His desk, his laptop, the stack of papers. But then he saw it. A single white envelope sitting neatly in the center of his desk. No name on it, no handwriting, no stamp. Just an envelope. He picked it up and sat down, holding it for a moment before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few words typed neatly in black ink. "We are watching. We will win." His breath caught in his throat. He turned the paper over, but there was nothing else. No signature, no clue. He stared at it, his mind spinning. Who was watching? Who wanted him to lose? Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Rayesh, the young engineer who had stood up for him yesterday. The message simply said, "Please meet me on the roof." It's urgent. Sundar glanced at the envelope one more time before slipping it into his pocket. He rose and walked to the elevator, pressing the button for the roof. As the elevator climbed, his thoughts raced when the doors opened. The morning sun hit his face, bright and sharp. The roof was empty except for Rayesh, standing near the edge, his hands buried in his pockets. Looking pale and nervous. "What's going on?" Sundar asked softly, stepping closer. Rayesh turned, his eyes wide with worry. "Sir, you need to be careful," he whispered. "There's more going on than you think." Sundar's heart tightened. "Tell me." Rayesh swallowed hard. I heard them talking last night. Two of the senior executives. They said they're going to push you out. They said you're weak now, that you're vulnerable, and if you don't leave quietly, they'll make sure it ends badly for you. Sundar felt his stomach drop. He stared at Rayesh, trying to read his face. "Are you sure?" Rayesh nodded quickly. "I'm sure." I didn't want to believe it, but I heard it with my own ears. I think they're the ones behind those emails. And that envelope. Sundar looked out over the city, his mind clouded. Betrayal had a way of cutting deeper than hate from strangers. These were people he had trusted, people he had believed in. After a long silence, he said, "Thank you for telling me." Rayesh shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I think you should fight back. Don't let them win." Sundar gave him a faint smile. That's what my mother would have said too. But as he walked back to his office, doubt began to creep in again. He thought of the sly smile he had seen on the woman's face last night, the way she had walked away so quickly. He thought of the envelope, of the cruel email, of the whispers in the halls. The walls of the office now felt taller, colder, more threatening than ever. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings and fake smiles. Every time he entered a room, conversation stopped. Eyes flicked away. People whispered behind his back. By late afternoon, he was exhausted. He stepped into the bathroom just to breathe for a moment. He leaned over the sink, splashing his face. Again, staring into the mirror. Then he heard it. Two voices outside the bathroom door. Low, hushed, but clear enough to catch their words. Asterisk. He's done. The board will vote next week. All we have to do is keep the pressure on. He'll quit before then. Good. He was never one of us anyway. Their footsteps faded down the hall, leaving Sundar frozen. His hands gripped the edge of the sink until his knuckles turned white. He stood there for a long time. His mind caught between rage and sorrow. But then another memory. His father's voice this time. Is not about how hard they push you down, son. It is about how you choose to stand back up. He straightened slowly, took a deep breath, and walked back to his office. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he sat alone at his desk, thinking. The city lights outside began to glow, one by one, like little sparks of hope. He reached for his phone and called his wife. I think they want me out, he said quietly when she answered. There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then, she said gently, and do you want to let them? He closed his eyes. No, but I don't know how to fight this. She chuckled softly. You've been fighting your whole life, Sundar. You just forgot for a moment? Don't let them remind you of your pain. You remind them of your strength. Her words settled over him like a blanket. Warm. Steady. Thank you. He whispered. After hanging up, he sat for another hour, planning. Writing notes, making lists. He would not walk away. Not yet. He would fight, but he would fight his way, with respect, with resilience, with kindness where he could find it, and with steel where he needed it. Just as he was finishing his notes, there was a soft knock at the door. He opened it to find the janitor from the night before. She held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Someone left this for you, she said, her eyes kind but worried. He thanked her, closed the door, and sat down, staring at the package. His hand shook slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single black folder. No label, no writing. He flipped it open, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of him walking home. Pictures of his wife picking up their daughter. Pictures of his daughter at school. And a note slipped between the photos. Leave now, or we won't just watch. We'll act. He stared at the photos, his jaw tightening, his heart pounding in his ears. And then his phone buzzed again. A text message from an unknown. Number. You have 72 hours. Decide wisely. He set the phone down slowly, looking out at the night sky. He felt the weight of the entire city pressing down on him, and yet something inside him burned hotter than the fear. They wanted him to run. They wanted him broken, but he wasn't broken yet. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and whispered to himself, let's see how far you're willing to go. Because I'm not leaving. Just as he turned toward the door, however, his phone buzzed again. This time, another message. This one made his stomach twist in shock. It simply read, check your daughter's school. Now. He froze, staring at the screen, a cold dread washing over him. He grabbed his phone and his keys and ran toward the elevator, his mind spinning, his heart hammering, as the walls of his office blurred around him. Asterisk the shadow at the school car sped through the night, its headlights cutting sharp lines across the dark streets. Sundar sat in the back seat, leaning forward, gripping the headrest in front of him. The driver stole a few glances at him in the mirror, but said nothing. Sundar's jaw was tight, his mind racing with every possible nightmare. He kept staring at his phone, At the message that had shattered the fragile calm he'd tried so hard to build. Check your daughter's school. No. He felt sweat bead at his temples, despite the cool air. He kept thinking of her, the way she laughed when she ran through the park, the way her small hand always reached for his in a crowd, the way she would press her face into his chest when she felt afraid. The thought of someone watching her, hurting her, was almost too much to bear. His heart hammered in his chest like a drum, faster and faster, when they pulled up to the school. The gate was locked, but the lights inside were still on. Sundar didn't wait for the driver to stop completely before he jumped out. He ran to the gate and shook it hard, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone there? It's an emergency." After a few seconds that felt like hours, a security guard emerged from the shadows, holding a flashlight. He squinted at Sundar, then frowned when he recognized him. "Sir, it's late." "What are you doing here?" "My daughter," Sundar panted. "Where is she?" "Is she safe?" "Please, tell me she's safe." The guard looked confused. "Your daughter?" "Sir, the children all went home hours ago. No one's here now." But Sundar's panic didn't fade. "Let me in, please." The guard hesitated, then unlocked the gate. Sundar pushed past him, running toward the main building. The hallways were dark and eerily quiet, the faint smell of chalk and paper in the air. His footsteps echoed off the walls as he moved quickly toward her classroom, his chest tightening with every step. When he reached the door, he pushed it open and froze. Inside. On the small teacher's desk lay another envelope. This one was red, and on the front, in block letters, it said, "You were warned." His hand shook as he tore it open. Inside was a single photograph, his daughter sitting at her desk. Her face calm, but her eyes full of confusion, as if she'd just been told something she didn't understand. Standing behind her was a figure, blurred and unrecognizable, with a hand resting lightly on her shoulder. And below the photo, a note. "She doesn't have to pay for your mistakes. You have 48 hours now." Sundar dropped into a chair, his legs suddenly weak. His hands clutched the photo so tightly that the edges crumpled. He stared at the note, his mind a storm of anger and fear. He didn't hear the guard approach until he spoke softly. "Sir, is everything all right?" Sundar stood slowly, stuffing the photo and note into his pocket. His voice was quiet but steady. When he spoke, "Yes, thank you. Just lock the doors behind me." The guard looked uneasy but nodded. Sundar walked back out into the night, his steps deliberate now, his eyes hard. In the car, he sat in silence all the way home. When he arrived, he peeked into his daughter's room. She was sleeping peacefully, curled up under her blanket, clutching her stuffed bear. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching her, memorizing her small, perfect face, letting her soft breaths calm the storm inside him. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. The next morning, Sundar arrived at the office earlier than usual. The building was quiet, the air still heavy from the night before. He carried the red envelope in his briefcase. As he stepped into his office, he saw someone waiting for him. It was the janitor again. She stood by his window, holding a cup of tea in both hands. She turned as he entered and gave him a faint smile. "Bad dreams?" she asked gently. He didn't answer at first. He walked to his desk, set down his briefcase, and sat. Then he looked up at her. "They're threatening my family now," he said quietly. Her smile faded. She nodded slowly, as if she already knew. She set the cup of tea on his desk and said, "You know why they're doing this, don't you?" He looked at her, confused. "Because you scare them," she continued. "You scare them because you still believe in something they forgot how to believe a long time ago." He stared at her, her words sinking in like stones dropped into water. "You can leave if you want," she said softly. "But you already know what kind of man you'll become if you do." Then she turned and left, leaving him alone with the cup of tea in his thoughts. Later that day, he called Rayesh into his office. The young engineer looked nervous as he sat across from Sundar, glancing at the briefcase on the desk. "I need your help," Sundar said, his tone calm but firm. Rayesh leaned forward. "Anything, sir. Find out who's behind this. Everything. The emails, the photos, The threats. I want names. I want proof. Rayesh swallowed hard but nodded. Yes, sir. After Rayesh left, Sundar opened the red envelope again and stared at the photo of his daughter. Rage burned quietly in his chest, but it wasn't the kind of rage that consumed. It was the kind that sharpened. The next few days were a blur of whispers, secret meetings, and quiet phone calls. Rayesh worked late into the night, sifting through servers, tracing emails, digging into records. Sundar stayed at his desk, his mind a battlefield of memories and plans. He thought of his childhood again, of the time he had been pushed down by bullies at school, of how his mother had knelt beside him, wiping his tears, saying, "Stand up. You're not smaller than anyone here." And now, decades later, the lesson. Still held by the end of the third day, Rayesh came back with a folder. His face was pale, his eyes tired, but there was a glimmer of triumph there too. "I found them," he said quietly, placing the folder on the desk. Sundar opened it slowly. Inside were pages of names, emails, and photographs. At the very top, the woman with the sly smile, the one he'd seen outside his office that night. Her? He asked. Rajis nodded. "She's been orchestrating everything, and she has all eyes on the board. They've been planning this for months. They want you out because you refused their proposal to cut jobs. They said you were too soft, too emotional to make the hard decisions." Sundar closed the folder, his jaw tight. "Soft," he murmured. He looked out the window, watching the sun sink behind the horizon. Soft, they called him, as if kindness was weakness. As if respect was a flaw, he turned back to Rayesh, his eyes calm but hard now. "Thank you," he said. "You've done enough. I'll handle the rest." After Rayesh left, Sundar sat alone in the office. He stared at the folder for a long time, thinking. The city lights flickered outside, distant and indifferent. Finally, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. When the voice on the other end answered, he spoke only 2 words. "It's time." Then he hung up. The next morning, the woman with the sly smile arrived at the office early, confident and composed. She was already picturing herself in Sundar's chair, already thinking of how she would announce his departure to the team, but when she opened the boardroom door, she froze. Sundar was already there, standing at the head of the table, his hand resting calmly on the surface. The entire board sat around him, silent, watching her. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice steady. She swallowed hard, the first crack in her perfect composure. "Please," he continued, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Sit. We have much to discuss." She sat slowly, trying to keep her mask intact. But inside she felt something cold slither through her veins, because in that moment, she realized he wasn't broken after all. He wasn't leaving, and somehow he knew everything. The quiet storm. The boardroom was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the lights above. The air felt thick, heavy, charged with something unspoken. Sundar stood at the head of the long table, his hands resting lightly on the polished wood. The woman sat across from him, her back straight, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes darted briefly toward the folder in front of him, the one she knew he shouldn't have. But Sundar's face was calm. Too calm, that was what frightened her most. He took his time before speaking, letting the silence stretch, watching how it made her squirm ever so slightly in her seat. The other board members sat frozen, caught between curiosity and unease, glancing from Sundar to her, wondering what was about to happen. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and deliberate. "When I came here," he began, "I believed in this company more than anything. I believed in the people who built it, the people who kept it alive, and the people who dreamed of what it could become. I believed we could change the world without losing ourselves." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. Some of the board members lowered their gaze under his steady look. But lately, he continued, "I've seen things here that I never thought I would see. Words whispered in shadows. Plans made behind closed doors. Decisions driven by fear, by greed, by something uglier than ambition, and I've stayed quiet longer than I should have. He picked up the folder slowly, holding it between his fingers. But you gave me no choice. He opened the folder and began to read aloud. The room held its breath as he listed the emails, the secret meetings, the names of allies she had gathered to force him out. Each word landed like a stone in still water, breaking the illusion she had so carefully built. The woman's mask cracked with every line. First, a faint tremor in her hands, then the tightening of her jaw, then her eyes narrowing as she realized. There was no denying it now. When he finished reading, he closed the folder gently and looked at her. Do you deny it? He asked, his tone almost kind. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, she looked to the others, searching for support. But the board members only shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. The room was no longer hers. Finally, she straightened, forcing a thin smile. You think this changes anything? She said quietly, though her voice shook. You think you can still lead after this? They already doubt you. They already see you as weak. Sundar tilted his head slightly as if studying her. Then he spoke, and his voice was soft but sharp. Kindness is not weakness. Respect is not weakness. Humility is not weakness. If you think they are, then you've already lost more than you know. The words hung in the air like a quiet storm, filling the room with a strange, heavy calm. She didn't reply. She simply rose from her seat, her face pale but composed, and walked out of the room without looking back. Sundar remained standing, watching her go, until the door closed behind her with a faint click. Then he turned to the board. We will not let this place become what she tried to make it, he said simply. We will do better. All of us. One by one. The board members nodded, some with relief, some with guilt in their eyes. When the meeting ended, the room slowly emptied, leaving Sundar alone. He sank into a chair, feeling the weight of everything settle onto his shoulders at last. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation now gave way to exhaustion. But he couldn't rest yet. His phone buzzed. He picked it up and saw a message from Rayesh. We're not done. There's more. Come to the basement, Pear King. Lot. Now. He frowned but stood anyway, tucking the folder under his arm as he walked out of the boardroom and down the long hall. The building was quiet, the corridors dim now that the meeting was over. The elevator ride down was slow, and he caught his reflection in the mirrored walls, tired, worn. But still standing, the basement parking lot was dark and cold, the concrete floor echoing with each of his footsteps. He spotted Rayesh near the far corner, standing next to a black car. His expression was tense, his eyes flicking nervously toward the shadows. What is it? Sundar asked as he approached. Rajesh held up a tablet and turned it toward him. We traced everything, Rayesh said quietly. Emails, photos, threats, and we found something she was hiding even from her allies. Sundar studied the tablet. On the screen was a folder labeled Phase 2. What is it? Plans, Rayesh said grimly, to ruin you completely. Leaks. To the press. Fake evidence of misconduct. Even threats to your family if you didn't leave quietly. She was ready to escalate if today didn't work. Sundar felt the cold settle deeper into his chest. He took the tablet and scrolled through the files. Each document was another knife in the dark, waiting to strike. She wasn't working alone. Rayesh added, There's someone above her. Someone you haven't seen yet. The one giving all the orders. Sundar looked up sharply. Who? Rayesh shook his head. I don't know yet, but they're closer than you think. Sundar handed the tablet back and straightened his jacket. His face was calm again, but his eyes were hard. Find out, he said simply. As he turned to leave. Rayesh called. After him softly. Sir, are you sure you want to keep fighting? It's dangerous. They've already crossed lines. Sundar paused at the elevator, his hand hovering over the button. Then he glanced back, and there was something almost sad in his faint smile. If we don't fight? Rayesh, he said quietly, then what's left of us? The ride back up felt longer than usual. When he stepped out into the quiet hallway, He found the janitor waiting for him again, leaning on her mop handle. She watched him silently for a moment, then said, "You look heavier than yesterday." He stopped, managing a faint smile despite the weight on her shoulders. "Maybe I..." She tilted her head slightly. "But you're still standing." "For now," he admitted. She gave a knowing nod. "Then you're already winning." He didn't quite understand what she meant, but the words stayed with him as he walked back to his office. That night, after the building emptied, he sat at his desk staring at the city lights once more. The folder lay open in front of him. The files on Rayesh's tablet haunted his thoughts. Somewhere, someone was still pulling strings, still hiding in the shadows. He thought of his daughter sleeping peacefully at home, of his wife's gentle voice on the phone, of his mother's quiet wisdom and his father's strength. He thought of all the people who still believed in him. And slowly, he felt a new resolve harden in his chest. He reached for his phone and dialed. A private number, one only a handful of people in the world even knew. When the voice answered, he spoke clearly, without hesitation. "I need to know who it is," he said, "and I need to know by tomorrow." The voice on the other end replied simply, "Understood." He hung up and leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the day settle deeper. But just as he opened his eyes again, he noticed something strange on his desk. Where the red envelope had been earlier, there was now a small black card. He hadn't seen anyone enter, hadn't heard a sound. He picked up the card, slowly. It was blank on one side. On the other, in faint silver letters, it read, "You're playing a game you cannot win." And below it, smaller, "You have 24 hours. He stared at the card for a long time, feeling the chill of the room wrap around him like a warning. Then, very quietly, he whispered to himself, "We'll see." But somewhere far above him in an office he couldn't yet see, a figure stood at a window looking down at the city. The figure held the phone to their ear, watching the lights flicker below. "He's still fighting," the figure said into the phone. A pause, then a faint laugh. "Good," the figure added. "Let's make him bleed." Asterisk, the hidden physique night stretched long and quiet, but inside Sundar's office, the air was alive with urgency. He sat at his desk, the black card still in his hand, staring at the faint silver letters. "You're playing a game you cannot win." He turned it over and over, as if the answer might be hidden somewhere in the texture of the paper. His phone lay in front of him, screen dark, waiting. The city lights outside blinked lazily, indifferent to the storm gathering in his heart. Every tick of the clock sounded louder tonight. 24 hours. That was all they'd given him. A whole career, a lifetime of quiet battles fought and won, now hanging by the thin thread of a single day. His thoughts drifted to his daughter. Again, her small hands waving to him from the school gate, her sleepy voice telling him she was proud of him. She had no idea how close the shadows were creeping toward. Then, finally, the phone buzzed. Sundar snatched it up at once. The voice on the other end was low, deliberate, confident. "We have a name," it said. Sundar sat up straighter, gripping the receiver tighter. "Who?" A pause. Then the voice spoke a single name, and the room seemed to shrink around him. "Impossible," Sundar murmured, though even as he said it, he knew it was not impossible at all, because the name they gave him was one he knew well. Too well. A man who had once been his mentor, his advocate, the first to take a chance on him when he arrived in America. A man who had sat at his family table, who had carried his daughter on his shoulders at a company picnic. The name burned in his mind now. "Robert, he's been behind everything?" Sundar asked, though his voice was hollow now, already knowing the answer. "Everything," the voice confirmed. "The woman who tried to oust you, just his pawn. The threats, the photos, the board members he turned against you. All him." Sundar let the phone fall back into its cradle, staring blankly at the wall in front of him. He felt the air leave his lungs in a slow, heavy breath. Of all the people he had feared, Robert had never been one of them. Robert, who had once told him in his quiet office late one night, "They're going to change everything here someday, Sundar." Just don't lose yourself along the way, Dot. And yet, here they were. He sat in silence for a long time, his thoughts a tangle of anger, betrayal, and a faint, bitter sadness. But the clock kept ticking. Dot when he finally stood. It was with a heavy resolve. He picked up the folder Rayesh had given him, slipped the black card into his pocket, and walked toward the elevator. Dot the building was empty now, quiet except for the faint hum of lights and the echo of his footsteps on the polished floors. When the elevator doors closed around him, he saw his own reflection in the mirrored walls, eyes dark and sharp, mouth set in a grim line. He pressed the button for the top floor. Robert's office. Dot as the elevator rose. He thought of all the little moments that had brought him here. His mother telling him to stand tall, his father teaching him to hold his ground, his wife reminding him not to forget his strength, his daughter sleepy, I'm proud of you. All of it. The elevator dinged softly at the top floor, and the doors slid open into a dimly lit corridor. At the end, Robert's office door stood half open, a faint light spilling into the hallway. Sundar walked slowly, each step measured, the folder tucked firmly under his arm. Inside, Robert stood by the window, his back to the door, hands clasped loosely behind him. He didn't turn as Sundar entered. You're late, Robert said quietly. Sundar closed the door behind him and stood just inside, watching the man who had once been his friend. You knew I would come, Sundar replied. Robert finally turned, his expression calm, almost amused, though there was something colder in his eyes now than Sundar remembered. Of course you would, Robert said. You were always predictable, still clinging to your little notions of respect and kindness. But you don't win wars that way, Sundar. You just survive them. Barely. Sundar's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. You could have come to me, whatever this is. You didn't have to. Didn't have to what? Robert cut in, his voice rising slightly. Didn't have to remind you of your place? Didn't have to show you how this world really works? He walked slowly toward Sundar now, his steps quiet but deliberate. You thought they would follow you forever. Robert continued, gesturing vaguely toward the city outside. You thought they respected you, but they don't. They respect power. That's it. And you don't have it anymore. Sundar studied him silently, letting the words wash over him like bitter wind. Finally, he opened the folder and laid it on the desk between them. You've been hiding behind others, Sundar said softly, flipping through the pages. Using her to do your work, threatening my family, plotting in the shadows. And yet here I stand. Robert glanced at the papers with mild interest, then back at Sundar. You're not here to expose me, Robert said, a faint smirk playing on his lips. You're here to beg me to stop. But Sundar didn't flinch. Instead, he met Robert's gaze and held it steady. You think you know me, Sundar said quietly, but you don't. I don't beg. Not for myself, and not for you. Robert's smile faded just slightly. Sundar closed the folder, sliding it back under his arm. If you wanted me to break, Sundar said, his voice calm but edged with steel, you should have come for me, not for them. Robert tilted his head, as though weighing something in his mind. Then he chuckled faintly and turned back toward the window. You don't understand, Sundar, he said, his voice soft now. You already lost the moment you walked into this building. Everything after that was just a matter of time. Sundar stared at the back of Robert's head, the faint reflection of the city lights on the glass in front of him. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, but cutting through the quiet like a blade. You're wrong. Robert glanced over his shoulder, eyebrows slightly raised. Sundar took a slow step forward, lowering his voice even more, as though speaking to himself as much as to Robert. You think power is everything, he said. You think fear is stronger than respect? But you've forgotten something. Robert turned fully now, watching him. Sundar's eyes darkened, his tone sharp but steady. The people you step on to climb higher, they remember, and one day, they stop being afraid of you. He set the black card down on the desk between them and leaned in slightly. Your 24 hours, Sundar said quietly, just ran out. Robert stared at the card, his lips parting slightly, just enough to betray the first crack in his confidence. Sundar straightened. tucking the folder back under his arm, and turned toward the door. But just as he reached for the handle, Robert's voice stopped him. "You really think you've won?" Robert said, and though his words were calm, there was something darker in them now, something that made the room feel colder. Sundar paused, his hand on the door. "You think this is over?" Robert added, his tone low and dangerous. Sundar didn't turn. He simply said, "It ends when you stop." And then he opened the door and stepped out into the hall. As he walked back toward the elevator, his phone buzzed again. A single message from an unknown number. "You made your move. Now watch ours." His stomach tightened as he read it. He quickened his pace, stepping into the elevator, pressing the button for the ground floor. But just as the doors began to close, he caught sight of something out of the corner of his eye. A figure standing at the far end of the corridor, half hidden in the shadows. Watching him, the figure didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there, still and silent. And in that moment, Sundar understood. The fight was far from over. As the elevator descended, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever came next. Because somewhere in the darkness, the real game had only just begun. Asterisk, the last light that city outside the window was quiet. But inside Sundar's heart, a storm raged. The elevator doors opened to the ground floor with a soft chime, but he stayed inside for a moment, gripping the handrail, staring at his own reflection in the mirrored wall. His tie was loose now, his shirt collar slightly wrinkled. His eyes were dark and hollow, but somewhere deeper there was still a spark. The same stubborn spark that had carried him from a dusty street in India. All the way here. When he finally stepped out into the lobby, the building was almost empty. Only the faint hum of the lights above and the quiet footsteps of a janitor in the distance reminded him that he wasn't completely alone. He walked toward the glass doors, feeling the cold marble beneath his shoes, but even as he pushed outside, into the night, the words of the final message still burned in his mind. "You made your move. Now watch ours." He couldn't shake the image of that figure standing in the shadows on the top floor, silent, still watching. It was as if the fight had grown bigger than him, stretching into places he couldn't see, against faces he didn't. Yet no, and yet he kept walking. He climbed into the back of the waiting car and gave the driver a quiet nod. The ride home was long and heavy, the streets passing by in a blur of yellow lights and dark windows. He didn't speak. He simply stared out the window, fingers resting lightly on the black card in his pocket. When he reached his house, the lights inside were off except for the faint glow of the kitchen. He slipped off his shoes at the door and walked through the quiet hallway. His wife was sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked up when she saw him, her eyes soft but full of worry. "You're late," she said gently. "I know," he murmured. Sinking into the chair across from her, she studied him for a moment, then reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "They won't win," she said simply. Sundar stared at her hand, her fingers warm and steady against his own. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that kindness and strength could still beat back the darkness closing in around him. But before he could speak, his phone buzzed again. He hesitated, then answered. A voice, unfamiliar, calm, almost mocking, said only, "Look outside."